Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 192, and I'm delighted to welcome onto the podcast today Scott Piri. Scott, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me, Ben. It's an honor to be here and speak with you today.
I don't think we could start without saying a special thank you to a brilliant coach that's hooked us up and sorted this podcast out. So Dan Guzman, I've got to give him the shout out. He's linked us up, and I've had plenty of chats with him on what we can cover today, and we've got some exciting stuff. But just to start with, Scott, like we always start these podcasts, we always go into backgrounds, careers, and we could probably take up the whole podcast with yours, because I know you've been all over the place working with all sorts of different people. So can you give a whistle stop tour of your career so far?
Yeah, my career is probably unique, especially coming from the States. Lots of people don't associate, at least when I got started, somebody from the States working in football, soccer, right? As I have done a lot in my time. But, basically played football, soccer my whole entire life, even went to university for the first time and played Division I college soccer, all that kind of stuff. And always in that process, I was always kind of looking to learn, how do I get better, not just technically, tactically, but physically. It was always one of those things. At that time when I was playing, we didn't have a strength and conditioning coach. We didn't have, really any kind of true support, just old school coach, assistant coaches, right? Goalkeeper coach, and that's it. And you just go at it. So when I finished with that, playing there, I eventually started playing professionally in the States, and then over in Scandinavia for a couple seasons before I came back to the States and finished playing professionally. And during that time, it was always like, what would be the next chapter, where I'm going to go, what I'm going to do. And I always just really liked kind of the fitness aspect of being in that environment, being an athlete. And so during off season, I just kind of started going back to school, went to uni again, did all that kind of stuff during the off seasons when I was finishing up playing. And then I just jumped straight into working with people, right? First started off at basic, just training general people, but I always had a desire to try to work with athletes and get to that kind of next level. And fortunately for me, I had worked for a few years in London. I had my own company, and we were working with different athletes, different programs in the UK. But when I came back to the States, that's when I started things off with Athletes Performance, and they had just opened up the LA facility. And at that time, right, they only had Phoenix and Los Angeles facilities. So at that time, when I started with them, a small group of teams, right? We just had, the team in Phoenix and the team in LA. And then as time went by or whatever, I ended up spending 15 years working, right, with Athletes Performance, which then turned into EXOS. And in that journey, right, I had the opportunity to work with in many NFL combines, NBA pre-drafts, work with a lot of different veteran athletes in NHL, Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, and then also too worked in a lot of other things, rugby, lacrosse, Aussie rules football, things like that. But I always had this passion to work in football, soccer. So that kind of took me on the journey with Athletes Performance and EXOS, where worked for LA Galaxy, New York Red Bulls, had opportunity to work in Europe for clubs like Everton and Galatasaray, worked for national teams like Mexico, the Turkish national team, and then also do a little time with the US national team. And then I even got a chance to go to Brazil and work with Atlético Paranaense and be able to work in a big club in Brazil and South America with a big project working with the whole entire club. And just recently just finished working with Galatasaray, finishing out this season. And that's kind of it. So, I mean, I've get to see a lot of everything, having in my journeys over the last 15, 20 years working with Athletes Performance and EXOS. So great experience.
Brilliant. I think that's just perked everyone up listening, thinking, wow, there's a fair few teams in there. So it'd be great to draw on your experience for a few different areas on the podcast. One thing I wanted to get into to start with, probably more of a personal interest, probably quite selfishly for me, the combine, the NFL combine. Obviously, it's something that even if people don't watch the NFL, they're probably aware of. They're aware of maybe some of the events that are involved in the combine. But from working and preparing players for that to going into football, is there any crossovers or any lessons that you took from that structure?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is that when I spent my time in athletes performance and working in an event like the NFL Combine, it's just very, very specific. And you learn athletes are athletes. Now, if they're in different sports, right, doesn't mean they're always going to be different, right? There's a lot more things that they're similar than they're different, right? So there's many things that you can take on and draw from if you're working in one kind of sport like the, American football, NFL, getting them ready to go from that transition of going from the top level college player to then going to the combine, right, to prepare themselves to then hopefully get drafted very high to then go into the next career and playing in the NFL. And I think the biggest experience from that is that you have such a finite time, right? When I was working it was at the beginning it was 6 weeks. Now it's gone out to 8 weeks. But when you start, you don't get any extra time, right? So when the athlete walks in the door and they start working with you and your team and everybody around it, all the support staff that you have with you working on this journey, right, to get them, because once a date is set for when they show up to Indianapolis and they've got to do their 40 and they've got to do the vertical, they got to do the broad, they got to do the bench, they've got to do the 60-yard shuttle, the L drill, the 5-10-5, all these kinds of things, right? You have a very specific task, right? And it's one of the purest things that we do, right, in our world is performance, fitness, strength and conditioning coaches, speed coaches, movement coaches, whatever you want to call it, is that, hey, in this time, they've got to be able to do this, right? This is with expectation of the players, the agents, the teams, everything. So you learn right away in an environment like that there isn't a day to waste. There isn't, a set, a rep, a drill, an exercise. So everything needs to be planned perfectly, right? And more importantly, it needs to be planned perfectly with your support staff, right? Because you're working with sports psychologists, sports dietitian, you're working on the recovery, you're working on the media training, you're working on the Wonderlic test. And so, I mean, the athletes could easily be there 8 hours a day, right? 6 days a week, right? And so in that environment, you learn how to have a system, you learn how to be able to organize, but more importantly, you learn how to understand you're not a one-person show, right? You can only go as far as you and your team supporting all those players, right? And making sure you kind of create that culture and environment that, hey, this isn't going to be easy, but there's going to be points where you're not going to feel so good and you're going to question, you're going to doubt, but hey, we've done this many, many times before you. We're here to support you. You're going to make it. You're going to get to where you need to be, right? And mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, all those things will come together for you. And we're here for you to take you on that journey and make sure that you reach the goal you want to and get the results that you want to.
Yeah, brilliant. No, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because like you say, I suppose it's very different in a way because they have got that specific time. They've got those specific sort of events that they're preparing for. And obviously the sport is different, isn't it? Because for anyone that doesn't follow it so much, they're comparing for the combine.
Yeah.
And then you've got the season potentially as well. So there's two different things. Whereas obviously football, we can take lessons from it, but there's a lot more stuff going on, isn't there? There's a lot more I suppose differences in schedules and time of a pre-season and things like that. So it's just interesting to hear maybe some of your takeaways from that and maybe some of the similarities as well. In terms of another part of your experience, Scott, I know you've had experience managing big groups as well. And obviously being in sports like NFL, that is going to be the case. But I know you talked about before your time in Brazil. And when I was speaking to Dan, he mentioned that you might have had a fair few large group sizes over there as well. So what would be
Yes.
there's probably a few practitioners that can relate to this. So in terms of managing big groups, what would be your maybe takeaways or advice for coaches to get the most out of a big group like that?
Yeah, I mean, the project was very big. I mean, normally when we go in, right, somebody like myself or somebody with the support staff that we had, we go in, we would usually focus on one team, maybe two teams, right? And maybe the first team and maybe the second team, if we're working with the national team, and maybe the first team, and then maybe the under 21, right? Making sure that they kind of were set and ready. So when they transition from being a younger player to a more senior player, right? Then it would be a much smoother transition. But in Brazil, we had over 200 athletes, right? So the sheer number and volume, right? So we had the first team, we had the reserve team, we had the under 19, under 20 team, depending what age group they were playing at that time and what part of the season, under 17 and under 15. So, and they were all in the same facility, which was amazing, right? This facility, Atlético Permanente in Curitiba, like one of the top training facilities in all of Brazil. I mean, under 15s were there, living there, training, going to school. Under 17s were there, under 19s were there. And then, of course, the older players had their rooms there. So when they needed to stay certain nights or whatever, the day before a match or whatever. So to walk into a situation like that, where you're directly responsible for all the players, right? And the development of all the players, right? And more importantly, taking the players from under 15 to under 17 to under 19, right? We needed to look at the whole situation as a whole, right? And go, okay, technically, tactically, they were very good, right? Sometimes, right, when you go into clubs, coaches change, managers change, people come in and out, right? And the game model, right? The formation, the style of play, right? Could just change, right? And then all of a sudden you're like going, okay, well, what do we do with the players? We don't have the kind of players that we normally, right? Some can, but then some may need to go because we're not playing that same way of football. So the thing was in Brazil is that, the big ask was, how do we make the performance and the medical, right? And everything around this technical, tactical side that they had grown, right? From under 15 all the way up to the first team, how could we properly support that? And so, of course, we go in, we do a needs analysis, we look at everything. And so ultimately, the big takeaway is that, hey, we need to reduce the risk of injuries, right? Now, of course, we can't eliminate it, but dramatically, we are way too high, right? Across all teams and all levels. And the thing is that, you can look at performance from, one side or through the other side of it and go, oh, hey, let's make them bigger, faster, stronger, more fit. Okay, yeah, that's true. But ultimately, right, what you kind of have to think about is that these players are here for a reason, right? They're some of the top players in Brazil, right? Because I got to see time and time again so many players coming through the system, right? They didn't make it technically, tactically out. Here comes another 5 or 10 new players, and we're like looking, going, wow, okay. What happened to those players? They're like, yep, not good enough. So here comes 5 to 10 new players, okay? Let's see if they can make the grade. So we realized right away that one of the big things that we could contribute, right, from a performance end was decreasing the risk of injury, right, and decreasing soft tissue injuries, right? Contact injuries, there's not a lot you can do with, but as we know in football, soccer, we have a lot of soft tissue injuries, right? Non-contact injuries. And so we went on this journey in the first year, right? Was basically we were screening all the players, which meant in our small group of people, right? I mean, every time we screen all the players, that meant we had to screen over 200 players. So then we screen the players, we find the weak links, asymmetries, the compensations, right? Find the players that are red flagged, right? And now we start working with the rest of the support staff. Like, okay, how can we let's not wait till the player has a big injury or has a significant soft tissue injury before we start trying to work with them. And the cool thing is that, I mean, it was crazy hours, 7 days a week, because, even when one team wasn't there, right, you had still 2 or 3 teams in the building, so you were always working 7 days a week. So ultimately, in the first year, what was the cool thing is that when the president sat down with us, the upper management or whatever, and they're like going, okay, so give us a status report. Where are we? Right. And, ultimately we came back to him as like, yeah, we've been working with your staff, educating your staff. We've been working on the performance, educating and helping all your performance physios, dietitians, doctors, all that kind of stuff. But the big thing is in 1 year, we've reduced across the board through all your teams, 50%. We've reduced the soft tissue injuries or, non-contact injuries. And that's immense, right? Because when you look at it, when you can keep players in training, right? And then that means you're able to keep them in matches, right? And then you're able to keep your better players in training in matches, right? That ultimately is going to help in the overall and the result, right? It doesn't look sexy. It doesn't sound sexy, right? People are like going, oh, the easy thing is, right? Hey, let's get them bigger, faster, stronger, or whatever. And that's true. We were doing that. But we understood this underlying foundation that, hey, we needed to address this, right? Because we're just having way too many, right? You can't eliminate anything, but you can reduce those, that potential, right? To a very low number. And, that's what we set out to do. And that was huge for us. And then, of course, later on, as we stayed there, right, we just slowly start to implement some more of the strength, the power, the movement, the speed, right, the movement quality, movement efficiency. But we needed them to be able to do some of the basic things well, right? Go on a foam roller and not light up your whole entire body, right? Like, like I'm dying, right? I've never seen a foam roller before, and like they barely touches their calf, right? And it's on fire, or touches their hamstring or the quad. And you're looking at a player who's, young age, and you're like going, wow. But of course, normal, right? The Brazilian players, right? They start early.
Yeah.
And so a player who's on the under 19, under 17 team, they've been playing competitive high level football already for a long time. Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't necessarily think about it, but yeah, they have wear and tear on their body, right? And you're thinking, oh yeah, they're young, but you're like going, they play 11 months out of the year. Mm. So
there's massive lessons in there in terms of your approach to that, isn't there? Because essentially you've gone in, you've looked at the low hanging fruit and things that can make a real impact, isn't it? Whereas a lot of people get attracted to maybe the more fancy things that you've talked about, the speed, the power, the strength that is going to come. And obviously, the importance of it, but it's just really, that's a big takeaway for me, is that that can come, can't it? That can come later, but what can we impact now? And also from a higher, maybe technical point of view, from technical directors or whoever it is we're talking to, if you're presenting that data and that the impact that you've made on that program, that's massive for them, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, look, coaches, right? It comes down to some simple things. And I've worked with some unbelievably great coaches in my time, right? And they're always going to ask you some of the same questions over. Is the player available? Right? And how much can he play?
Yeah.
And then if he's available and how much he can play is not a problem, then how many matches can he play in a row, right? Over and over and over at a high level. Well, that just comes down to one simple thing: durability, right? We have to create durability in our players, right? Modern football, right, is not getting less matches. Modern football is only adding more matches. I mean, you can just see right now, right, it's going on in Europe, right? UEFA Nations League. I mean, they've even condensed the schedule more. They're playing 4 matches in this window, which would never happen before because of COVID, because of the World Cup coming up in November and December. So, when you're talking about modern football, it's not less matches, right? They're fighting to try to stop them from trying to play more matches. And this is trickling all the way down to the lower levels as well, too, right? So the thing is creating durability. It is performance. It's one very big, important aspect of performance, right? Making sure your players are available, how many matches they can play, what is the quality of it, and you need to have durability, right? Within that, of course, ultimately, can you look at this performance side of it, and when you have the opportunities and the time, right, to be able to bring that to the forefront? Absolutely. But, it's one of those things that a lot of times it gets lost in understanding that, right, we need to create more durable players, right?
Yeah, 100%. In terms of that culture over, and I don't want to spend the whole time talking about Brazil, but I think it's really fascinating because of the numbers, but also obviously everyone knows the quality of players that have come out of Brazil as well. I remember speaking to Callum Walsh about this ages ago as well on the podcast. But that culture in Brazil, where they're constantly producing this talent time and time and time again, was there anything that you noticed, Scott? And this is probably away from S&C sports science now and just looking at culturally. Is there anything that you notice where you're like, well, this is why these players are developing, and this is the reason behind why they've got so much talent?
Yeah, I mean, I think, having been all over the world, one of the things that that's a little bit different, and you see some similarities in other places in South American countries as well too. But the thing that I think is probably a little bit different about Brazil, it's one of the biggest countries in South America. Of course, their love for football and their passion for football is undeniable. But just the structure on which football is made, right? You go and you see them playing in the streets, they're playing in the beach, right? They're playing any style of football that you can imagine, right? Right. And it doesn't have to be organized, right? So there's such a early development of football in Brazil, right? And how this relates to the podcast is that, right, is the DNA of the player, the mentality of the player, because that's what we're always working with, right? Is in S&C, right? Is when that player steps in front of you, what kind of player do you have? What is their makeup, right? What makes them go? What makes them tick? What are things that you can use to your advantage, and what things that you probably shouldn't do too much of, because that's not going to really help you or them out, right? And so what you see is this underlying passion for football in Brazil of just loving it, right? Loving it for its purest and simple value, right? And so by the time they get to 15, 17, these ages or whatever, right? They understand it's transition, but they still have this unbelievable love, right, for the game. And I think sometimes when you go to some of the other countries, right, it's sometimes you see that, yeah, they love football, but when you see the Brazilians, they're laughing, they're joking, they're just doing some of the most stupid things with the ball, and you're like going, you would never see that anywhere else, right? And so I think this is such a big thing about why they develop so many football players, is because of their love, their passion for the game, the culture around it, and they allow them to go to a certain level before they say, okay, let's start to make this more of, let's take you to the next level, right? It's more of a business now, right? They've ingrained this love for the game. And then ultimately too, right, in a country like Brazil, is that, for a lot of players, this is their ticket, right? Yeah. They're not going to go to university. They're not going to go here. They're not going to go and do that, right? This is the ticket for them, their family, their relatives, their friends, right? Everybody kind of in their inner circle. So you see these players, right? And I've seen them, right, where they come and everything is like laughing, kind of joking, like that Brazilian style, and then all of a sudden the switch turns. Hey, I'm the person who's going to be representing the whole entire family, relatives, closest friend circle, right? And they take on that responsibility, and they're like, okay, now it's time, right? And so you don't get to see that. I mean, of course, sometimes you see this in other countries or whatever, but in Brazil, this is very common, right? And I think this is why you see so many Brazilian players, right? They have this first love and joy or whatever, but they also too, they look at it, this ultimately can be the ticket, right? And they take on this responsibility like an honor, right? Like a badge. And that's not a bad thing, right? Yeah. I mean, you look at some of these Brazilian players, right? They've gone on and have historic careers, right? And so Fernandinho, right? Fernandinho came from Atletico Palmeirense, right? He then went to Shakhtar Donetsk, and then he ended up at Man City. I mean, I had the opportunity to meet him when he comes back to Atletico Palmeirense. Educated person, great man, family man, speaks 5 different languages. And you're like going, wow, this guy took the love for football and the passion And then he realized that it was going to be something much bigger, right? Not just for him, but everybody that he affects directly around him. And you see that a lot with the Brazilian players, right? And that's very, very common with them.
Brilliant and fascinating as well. It's such an amazing culture, isn't it? And like you say, if we started naming the talents that have come out of Brazil, we'd be here all day. So yeah, incredible. But the other bit I wanted to go into, Scott, because there's so many topics that we could cover on this podcast. But
yes,
you mentioned about athletes' performance, obviously now EXOS, and your role with them. And if you could maybe go into what the role was and also how that impacted then your work with players, with teams going forward as well.
Yeah, I mean, I started at the bottom like everybody else, right? Just a normal, as we would call an athlete's performance specialist. And I had an opportunity to learn from some great people, right? You know, at that time, I just got, and you've been a few years in the industry or whatever, but it was the first time. And then at that time when athlete performance started, there was nothing like it, right? And so what Mark Verstegen created with a lot of other great people that he had around with him at the time, you know, it was all about, you know, providing and supporting the athlete in all levels, right? Not just performance, right? It was, of course, you know, they talk about their four pillars: the mindset, the nutrition, you know, the movement, the recovery, but was to put this whole kind of environment around the player to say, hey, look, we're here to really develop you. So I started off as a performance specialist, got to work with some other great performance league coaches, right? Assist here, assist there, carry this there, drag that over there, right? You know, all those kinds of things that every coach goes through, right? You know, like, hey, and then they're like, oh, yeah, we need you to break that all down. We need you to take that over to the other field. We're going to get started in 15 minutes. Okay, I got it, right? And, you know, like everybody, right? And you're like going, not that, but this is what you have to learn, right? Is that, you know, it's not glamorous, right? Even at the highest level, it's about doing the heavy lifting well every day. And then progressed into being a performance lead. And then ultimately, over the years, I was able to get myself to kind of a performance director position where then I was now on behalf of Athletes Performance EXOS was going in and working with teams or projects all around the world and being able to go in, right, with myself and then the small staff that I had to go in and say, hey, we're here to help you problem solve, right? We're here to help you put in a framework, a structure, a system, right, that is custom to the way that you can do things here, right? Because I can tell you how to do things in Athletes Performance or EXOS, but well, it's almost a perfect situation, right? You have anything and everything that you need. But when you go to some of these projects and some of these teams, right, it's far from that. So you need to be able to take all of those things, right? All those strengths, all those limitations into place. And you're like, okay, well, what can we make the best version or the best way for them, right? What is their custom solution here, right? With the people, resources, time, limitations, all those kinds of things, and do what we can. And so that's what you really learn, right? Is of course be open-minded, right? Because our industry is always changing, but you need to be able to have, you know, this understanding and being able to create this custom system for these teams, clubs, organizations, whatever it may be. Because when you leave, right, that's great, but you hopefully have left something behind for them to take to the next level, right? Hopefully you've been able to communicate and get them to understand working together, not separate, but working together jointly, right? Creating this environment around the players, the team, or whatever, creating this culture is far more beneficial, right? And will allow you to get success and the results that you're looking for, right? Maybe not necessarily in the short term, right? Because, you know, but of course our society likes things to happen quickly, right? You know, but ultimately, if you're given a little time, right, you will be able to make those results come.
Brilliant. Scott, the other thing I'm fascinated about with your experiences with all the different teams that you've been involved in Is the one that stands out as an opportunity where you felt you developed the most as a practitioner, and maybe why that was as well?
Yeah, I think it would probably be. I just finished the season, working with the New York Red Bulls, and I had at that time I had worked with LA Galaxy a few years before when David Beckham first came. So that was very interesting to see back when David Beckham first come, right, his first season with the LA Galaxy. We started the season without him. So to kind of see him come in and then transform not just the team, the organization, but the league as a whole, right? That was a very unique experience. And then fast forward, right, when I was working with the New York Red Bulls, right, that's when Thierry Henry was there, Rafael Marquez was there. So a very similar kind of situation, right? But then you now get to see it with a different organization, and now they have two superstars, right, that are kind of carrying on what David Beckham brought to Major League Soccer. So those were all very learning experiences, right? To be able to understand that the difference between you have such a high profile player, but then you have some players, right? In the States, unfortunately, they just finished playing university soccer. And next thing they know, they're a teammate of, David Beckham or Thierry Henry or Rafael Marquez, and they're just walking in like this going, oh, wow, right, I'm playing professional football, but here's my idol in front of me, right, as well. And you don't get to see that too often, right? In this day and age, right, pretty normal now for Major League Soccer to bring in some big time quality players that have this unbelievable level and played at such unbelievable level, and they walk into a Major League Soccer team and pretty normal now. But back then it wasn't so much. But the big one was when I went to Galatasaray the first time, right? This country is mad about football. And so to jump into that situation and not understanding, right, that, hey, football in Turkey, it's not just football, right? As we look at some other countries like South America, Brazil, or Argentina, or whatever, and you talk, oh, their fans and the media and this and that. I was just not expecting when I went to Turkey that it was going to be all of this, right? And, that was the biggest learning experience, was because when in that environment, right, working with such a legendary coach like Fatih Terim, right, the expectations are extremely high, right? And so fortunately, I had worked with him a little bit before in 2008 in the Euros, right, with the Turkish national team. So I understood the environment or whatever, but now to go and work with him with Galatasaray for the first time, and now every day for a whole entire season, right? Now I was like, wow. And then to be able to see the media, and then back then, right, social media wasn't such a big thing, but of course their media in general is just like all over you. So it was a big experience for me to learn how to be in such a pressure environment, right? We needed to win, right? We needed to win the league. We needed to get into Champions League. We needed to go as far as we could in Champions League, right? And when you work with a coach like that, right, you're in an environment where you win, and that's expected. You lose, and you're like, wow, what happened? Right? And the environment, the mentality, everything just drops to the floor. And you're like coming in like, okay, we lost a match. We can't win every match. And then you realize like, it's not just the coaches, not just the staff, not just the players, it's everybody drops. And so now you come into an environment where you're like going, okay, I need to try to do the best I can, not to say, hey, we accept losing. No. We learn from our mistakes, we try to get better, and then we move on. And this up and down, right? Win, everything is great. You lose, right? You're the worst team ever, right? And you're just going through this oscillating thing when you go through a whole entire season. And so, right, everything that I know I need to do or whatever, right? It just, everything becomes heightened, right? So making sure that organized every day, communicating every day, system is in place, right? Supporting the players, creating the culture, making sure everybody from the coaches, the support staff, right? Medical, performance, nutrition, regeneration. I mean, the list goes on and on. Everybody is working the same direction because we're not players, right? We can feel the ups and downs with the coaches and the players, but us as a staff, right? We need to be staying more in the middle. We never get too high and we never get too low, right? We need to stay in the middle, right? Because we need to be thinking long term, right? Our goal is we need to start strong, but we need to finish stronger, right? And yeah, it's not gonna be a perfect line, right? We're gonna have some really big wins and some losses that we're like, no, we shouldn't have lost that match, right? But we need to keep trending in that right direction, right? And that was a huge learning experience to be in that environment every day under that kind of, if you want to say, passion, pressure, whatever it is, to be able to perform and to just kind of always keep your eye on the prize. It was a big learning experience.
And just on that as well, Scott, I thought it'd be interesting to get your perspective on obviously the club environment like that, and you've mentioned over in the MLS as well, but then the national team and the sort of demands on you and maybe how you found that transition going into a national team when you've not got the players 24/7, you're not seeing them every day, you're seeing them for sporadically throughout the year. How did you find that? Like, what was some of the takeaways for you working with the national teams?
Yeah, I mean, that's always a struggle when you work with the national team because, it's a part-time team, right? And you can have some players coming in and out, depending on form, depending on injuries, all kinds of other things. So working in a national team, right, is very different than working in a club team, because when you're working in a club team, right, as anybody who's on this podcast that works in an environment, hey, it's very different when you're working 10, 11 months out of the year, right? And you're just grinding every day, right? And you're starting in the preseason somewhere in July, right? If you're typical European schedule, right? And then you're finishing the season somewhere, right, mid to late May, right? By the time you finish, you're just like, can I just have a couple weeks off, right? Where I don't have to see anybody, do anything or whatever, so I can just kind of, because you're just grinding. Then the national team is just very, very different because, yeah, the pressure, the intensity, or whatever, but it's very short bouts, right? And the thing is that you have an opportunity, usually, right, with your staff, your coaches, all the support staff that you have around you to kind of organize and set everything up, right? You literally can plan out of every minute of every day, right? Because you have them, right, for whatever it may be, 2-3 weeks for the build up to the major tournament and then the tournament itself. And so, you also too usually get a different kind of player, right? You get one of the best players in your country. So you're usually dealing with a different mentality of kind of player, right? It's usually not the first time. I mean, sometimes you'll get some first-time players into the national team that like going, hey, this is a great young player or whatever. But for the most part, you get some players that experience and understand that. So the thing is that organization and that attention to detail, right, becomes much more important during a national team, because you literally, like I kind of talked about the combine, you have that many weeks and your goal is this, and you need to make sure. But then there's also too this art within the science is that, which you're always talking about with the coaches, right? You don't want to do too little, but you don't want to do too much. And that's not just physically or mentally, right? Because you have to remember the players are coming from their club team, then they come from the club team to the national team, back to their club team, and they're looking at you going, I've already been playing 8 months of, for my club, and now national team, I'm here for, maybe a week or 2, 10 days, and then I'm back off, right? And then we're in the worst. So, or you're at the end of the season, right? And you're preparing for a major tournament, right? So you always have to take that into mind is like, yeah, we have this great opportunity. We have this set number of weeks that we can work with and we can plan out every day. But mentally, right, we have to be able to balance, right? Because they played so much football usually when you get them. And it's trying to find that, because on paper it looks great. Oh, we can do this and we can do this and we can do this and we do that. And then you'll just have some players like, well, can we just have a day off? I finished the season, I came straight here, and we haven't had a day off, right? And I think I've gone, whatever, 2 or 3 weeks without a day off, right? So you learn, right, that even though there's a lot of similarities, it's very different, right? And you also, to a degree, overall get a different kind of player. So you need to understand, right, when you're working the national team, sometimes mentally it's much more of an onus, if you want to say, a responsibility, than so much the physical. Yeah, you need to make sure you're doing that, but do you necessarily need to be like performance, right? Strength, power, speed, right? You're trying to get them to come in, and you're like going, are they healthy? Are they playing well? Right? Are they durable? Right? Are they going to be available? Right? Because they're a talented player already. So you're just trying to make sure you're ticking them on, right? And then try to gain some momentum as you start building through the short camp and then through the major tournament, right? So then hopefully they're playing their best football, right, at the end of the tournament.
Brilliant. I could talk through this stuff all day, but I wanna make sure that we don't keep you on all day, Scott. Can we move on to some of the quick fire questions that we finish each podcast?
Oh, absolutely. With? Yeah, no worries.
So the first being, who have been some of the biggest influences on your career so far?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to go straight to my time with Athletes Performance when I got into this industry, and I knew that I wanted to work with athletes, especially professional athletes at the highest level. And at that time, right, when I looked around, there was not many people that were doing. I mean, of course, you could find it maybe in the Olympic setting, or some team if you're working directly with a team. But at that time, there was nothing like Athletes Performance. So of course, Mark Verstegen is a huge influence, right? And just understanding how he developed that company, what he was trying to do with that company, right? And all the great people that he brought into. And then, of course, some of the great people that I worked with in the Athletes Performance LA facility. So Shad Forsythe, right, was at Arsenal for a long time, the German national team. And then Omi Iosaka, great physio that I worked with there, right? That was that time when I started learning, like, hey, we don't just do this over here, right? We work together with everybody on the team, right? It's not just, oh, the medical over here, the performance over here, the coaches over there, right? We all together, we all have the same goals, and everybody needs to work together. And then in the Arizona facility, right, I had Luke Richardson, a great coach, and he went and worked with the Denver Broncos for a long time, Houston Texans, right? So, a lot of experience in the NFL Combine and then in the NFL. And then Daryl Eto, a great coach, right, in Arizona as well. And so, he went on to work with the Houston Rockets and the Oakland Raiders, and now he's doing tactical work. So these guys in the beginning time when I was with Athletes Performance was a huge foundation of kind of just understanding what it's like to be with like-minded people that have the same kind of vision, goals, right, want to work together, right, no egos, right? I learn from you, you learn from me, we work together, right? We'll be able to do a lot more if we're all working together than trying to work separately, right, and not on the same agenda.
Brilliant. Scott, what would you say your biggest strength is as a practitioner?
I think at the beginning it was, understanding, I needed to bring some passion and energy, right? And, that kind of level of intensity to it. But over time, I realized that, being able to communicate, right? Being able to bring people together, being able to get people on the same system, right? Or at least general way or direction was very, very important, right? Because in this industry, if you're going to make a real big impact, right, you can do a lot by yourself, but you can do so much more when you're working with a lot of high quality experts with you, right? And so, over that time, as I worked out the performance, that just became, right, being organized, communicating, creating a system, making sure everybody understands their role and understands how they contribute, right? And that we all have each other's back, right? We're sending the same message to the players, the coaches, all those kinds of things, because this is very, very important. Because as you know, coaches, right, players will come in, and if they kind of hear or smell hey, somebody doesn't agree with what's going on, right? Then they're like going, oh, hey, this person said something over there, right? And so it's very important that you're unified and
Yeah.
you're all going together and you're going in the right direction, because you need to be able to help the coaches, the rest of the support staff, everybody that's working with the players and the teams, right, to get them going in the right direction. And I'll give you a perfect example. When we work with the NFL Combine, right, we have 20 players, right? They all come from different universities. So we're working with 20 players all at the same time for the same goal, to go to the NFL Combine, right? And to do all these physical, mental, psychological interviews, all these kinds of tests, right? And the thing is that we take 20 players, well, they kind of become a team, but they've come from different teams. They have the same goal. So the thing is that you learn right away that, hey, everybody needs to be saying the same thing and going in the same direction, because this is how we're going to get them there, right? If people want to be doing different things, right, then that causes, issues, right? Causes people like going, oh, wait, maybe should I go this way or should I go that way? And now all of a sudden you've got everybody going everywhere, and then nobody is really being able to help anybody in regards to how the players really need to get there. And so that was a huge influence for me.
Yeah, that's so important. And it sounds so obvious, but then there's so many teams still where that is happening, isn't it? And the first players to sniff, first people to sniff that out are the players, aren't they? They know when that's not right.
Yeah, and look, I've worked with a lot of unbelievably intelligent people, some experts. But the thing is ultimately the day, the player doesn't care if you're the best of the best. They just want to make sure that you're really good. But more importantly, they want to hear a consistent dialogue, right?
Yeah.
Consistent message. And so if that message gets changed over here, and so that's the thing is that, right, as we ask our players to be team players, right? Every day, hey, yeah, you need to do your role, but you need to understand your role within the team and then how you work with the team, right? When we start talking about, our background and our education, we're not taught like that, most of us. I mean, I was very fortunate to have played professional football, soccer, and been in that environment for a long time. So it was already kind of there for me. But a lot of people who come from, if you want to say, the academia university setting, right, and then they go into this environment, they're not really ever experienced being in a team. And now all of us coming together. So, right, that's one of those things, is that you can be a great individual, right, but then putting that person, right, in a team environment, right, the great teams and the great organizations are the ones where they have intelligent people, all those people are working together, right? And so at the end of the day, they may, in that medical meeting or performance meeting at 8 a.m. before all the players roll in, right? They go through everything they need to go through, and then they say, okay, this is what we're saying as a group. Everybody's saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. And this is very important. And the top clubs, they do this, right? Because it's not just about just getting the best of the best. It's like getting great people, but also too bringing them together to create that culture and environment around the players to make sure that it's in line with the ethos of the club and where their long-term and short-term plans are, right, to get those results, to get that success.
Brilliant. Scott, if I was to take you back pre-athlete's performance, just starting out, not quite sure that you're going to end up in all these roles, not sure where you're going to go with your career, what would be your top advice for that, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, look, in this industry, I think the thing is that you just need to be patient, right? I came into the industry relatively late, right? I didn't come directly from university and then step into this role, right? And go, hey, I want to train professional athletes or whatever. Even when I finished as a player, right, I kind of started back at ground zero and then built my way back up through. And it would just be patient, right? There's always things for you to learn, always things for you to get better at, right? And, in this day and age, right, that's really difficult sometimes, right? People want to get into the industry, right? And I think there's this overall feeling like, oh, I need to make a splash. I need to hit it big right away. And then the reality is that, no, you don't. But what you need to do is you need to keep developing, you need to keep growing, you need to keep learning, right? You need to keep understanding, like, what are the big pictures, where you're going, what is your direction. You just need to be patient, right? It takes time to develop, right? And so I would say being patient, and then trying to find out who the people are that the best in the industry of what you want to do, right? Whatever that may be, whatever it is, right? From a performance side, if you want to be a performance person that has more of a sports science emphasis, right? If you're in the performance and you want to be more towards, rehab specialist, or reduce the risk of injury, or whatever that may be, or you may be more of a strength and power performance person, or you may be more of a speed or whatever. It doesn't matter. Like, go on and try to find and learn from these people who are the best, right? Because this is an eye-opening experience, right? Because you can find a lot of people who are saying a lot of things, but when you find the best people, you start to see the same themes over and over again. You're like going, regardless of who they are and what kind of niche within the industry we're talking about, you start to see the same traits, right? You start to see the same sort of things. You're like, well, that's interesting. That person over there who's really good at that and works for that club or does this or that, even though this person is in a different niche, yeah, they do some things slightly different, but they do think very, very similar, right?
Yeah.
Because those core principles shouldn't really change.
And then just final thing, Scott, in terms of CPD continual learning, what's your approach to that now?
Always, always. I mean, it doesn't matter, when you're younger in the industry, or as you've been in the industry like myself for a long time, is that you need to keep learning. And the reality is, this is our industry just keeps growing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and especially, within this last 5-6 years of this explosion with data, right? Data analytics, right? Sports science, all that kind of stuff. And so the thing is that, being able to understand that this industry, especially with technology, right, kind of being a driver or forefront, is great, but you need to be disciplined in all the areas that you need to be working in, right? It can't just be, hey, I'm just a person with the weights, and then I don't understand the mentality of the player or the team or the other coaches or support staff I work with, right? Or it's only the numbers, right? And then I don't understand, like, how recovery, right? How sports dietitian or nutrition or hydration it can be effective as well in this situation, right? So it's just continual, just keep learning, right? Because our industry keeps learning, right? And you take 6 months to a year off, right, without trying to update yourself and to learn what's going on or whatever, right? You can fall behind, right? Now, it doesn't mean that you need to learn everything needs to be new or whatever, but there's certain things that you start to see, right? And especially with all this data out here, right? I mean, there's a lot of numbers that get thrown around, and the question is that, are they valid, right? Or are they not so valid, right? What are the ones should we really be concerned about and understand, okay, those are some quality numbers that we need to be looking at, and maybe not. And so the thing is, you need to have that background to be able to go, yeah, that's good quality data. That we may need to do a lot more work before we can say that is something that we need to move on, right? Because in our day and age, right, we like to be so quick with everything. Like, oh yeah, we saw this or we saw that, and let's go. And then you found out later, you're like going, oh, we got ahead of ourselves. Maybe it wasn't what we thought it was. So yes, keep learning and keep trying to find that information from the top people. So that's what I would say.
Brilliant. Scott, thank you very much. That was absolutely brilliant. We've covered loads there, and I've run out of space on my page in terms of my notes. No, I really appreciate you coming on. To pull from your experiences and your career so far is incredible. So I hope the listeners have taken plenty from it, which I'm sure they have. And it will just be really interesting, the next steps on the career, and maybe we can catch up and do another one in a few months' time and just see what's going on then as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Ben, thank you. It's a pleasure. And again, give a shout out to Daniel Guzman for hooking us up. Much appreciated. And I look forward to talking to you again in the future. So thank you very, very much.